Hi, I'm Emily and welcome to the Pepper Knits Knitting Podcast. I am a knitter based in Perth in Western Australia, and thank you for joining me for another podcast episode. It's been a little while since I last sat down to film. I don't have any fully finished objects to share today, but I have two whips that have gotten a fairly decent amount of progress and an exciting acquisition that I will share at the end. There might be a little bit more background noise than usual. It's raining today and we have a tin roof, so it can be quite loud. There's also some gardening going on outside and a footy game going on in the oval across the road, so you might be able to hear the whistling and the shouting. But at this time of year in Australia, that is just every weekend if you live near one of the footy ovals, and I've just kind of learned to block it out, so hopefully you won't be able to hear it too much. I'll jump in by talking about what I'm wearing first. This is my Lento sweater, and I knit this, I think it was last year. It was a really popular pattern when it was released, and I think a lot of people were knitting it because it had such a low yarn requirement, so you can get away with using a bit more of a special skein or two skeins of yarn, like a hand-dyed or something a little bit more pricey. And I chose to knit mine in some hand-dyed yarn from Woollen Works. I'll stand up and show it off a little bit better. So it is a raglan construction, and I knit this with two strands held together. So the white strand at the base is the Bendigo Woolen Mills Luxury 8-ply, and I held it with a strand of the Surrey alpaca from Woollen Works in the colour Fairy Bread. Because of the airiness of the fabric, I find I reach for it quite often, and I really love the colours of it as well. My first work in progress is the Lunan Polo, and this is a test knit for Rebecca Clow. This has taken up so much of my knitting time, and it's taken way longer than I thought it was going to. There was a very generous testing window of I think 8 or 10 weeks, and that also got extended in the first couple of weeks. I'll try this one on and then I can talk about how it's all gone and the things that I need to do to finish this project off. So like I said, this is a test knit, and I'm knitting this in the Filcolana Arwetta yarn in the caramel colour, and I'm knitting it on the recommended needle size, which is 2.75 millimeters. So the Lunen comes in a lot of different options. There is a 4-ply and an 8-ply version, and I've knit the 4-ply version. And you can also have two options for the neckline. You have this polo collar, and then it also comes with just a standard round crew neck as well, with the same 3x1 ribbing for the body. Rebecca is a Scottish designer, so technically this is a summer design, and the original sample is knit in a summer fibre and also has short sleeves, but as you can see I have extended mine into long sleeves and knit it in a wool and nylon blend to have it ready for winter. Apart from the long sleeves, I've also modified the cuffs and the hem of the body to be a folded hem, and the original design is knit in just 1x1 ribbing for the cuffs and the hem. With the polo collar, I thought that the folded edges would tie in nicely. So when I previously showed this on the podcast, I had knit the whole yoke and was about to join the body and then had to rip everything out, and I had started the yoke again. I knit the back piece again, and I think I was up to here on one of the front pieces. The back shoulder seam does sit quite far down, but I'd only started knitting a little bit of this one, and I think I'd finished this front piece as well, so I hadn't even joined together in the front. And it's been a lot of knitting since then. So like I just mentioned, I did have to rip out the whole yoke. It was a bit of a bumpy start to this test knit. Basically, the pattern was completely rewritten 2 weeks into the test. Some of the testers didn't frog and just carried on with the pattern the way it was written, and I think for some sizes you could manage that. I'm knitting a size 2 and I wasn't comfortable with continuing. It wouldn't have looked as good, I don't think, so I'm glad I ripped back, but it was kind of a pain that basically a whole week's worth of knitting had to be ripped out and started again. I think that's just part of doing a test knit though, is that sometimes that's inevitable, and that's the point of doing a test knit, is that you pick up on those errors before someone who's paid for the pattern has picked up on those errors. So in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was just kind of annoying to have to go back and re-knit it all. So once I had joined the front pieces and then joined in the body, I did knit a little bit of length on the body, but I was really eager to go and put the collar on. Before the collar's put on, it does look a little bit weird. Like there is a bit of a weird shaping. You just have the raw edges coming down here and along the neck. And it also looked quite wide, so I definitely wanted to go in and add the collar just so I could gauge better the length of the body and make sure that nothing was going to shift around once I'd added the collar on. So I did start doing the collar, I I think I was one of the first testers to start doing it, and I picked up on a few issues that just didn't make sense. There was a bit of confusion for me on what was the right side and the wrong side of the collar, because technically you're working on the right side of the back, but then this becomes the wrong side of the collar. So even though you're working up this way, this is the wrong side of the collar, but it's the right side of the body of the fabric. I was getting a bit confused with that, and that did slow me down again, because I basically had to like rip out half the collar that I'd knit and then start again. And there are so many stitches on this collar. I really underestimated how long it was going to take, and I think that's another reason why this has taken me so long. I knit the collar on 2.5mm needles as well, so there was just a lot of stitches on tiny needles, and yeah, it was taking me quite a long time. And this is all double knitting as well, so it was fairly slow going and a little bit strenuous on my hands, so I didn't want to power through it and then end up injuring myself. Because the collar takes so long to knit and it uses a lot of yarn, if you're going to make this and you're not sure if you have enough yarn, I would definitely recommend adding the polo collar on first and then going through the body and the sleeves, because it took up so much more yarn than I was expecting. And I'm glad I did that, because I knew that I was adding long sleeves and I just guessed at how much yarn I would need for the sleeves. So it was good that I had the collar done, and most of the yarn for that was already used up, so I just could use whatever I had left for the sleeves. So here is how the body is looking with the long sleeves. Now that it's on and I'm wearing it with some proper jeans as well, I do really like how it's turned out. Maybe because I've also had a day and a little bit to just let this sit. I do have to say that it's not all completely blocked yet. The whole body, the collar is all blocked, and most of this sleeve is blocked apart from just the cuff at the end, and this whole sleeve is completely unblocked, which is very interesting. You can really see the difference in the fabric. This is the blocked sleeve and this is the unblocked sleeve, so you can really see how much the fabric evens and smooths out when it's blocked. I'm quite happy with the amount of ease in this. I did mention in the last episode that I thought there was going to be way more ease than what I had signed up for, so I don't really know what happened with that in the test, but I have to say I'm quite happy. There is a good amount of positive ease. I think for a winter garment, this is perfect. If it was a summer garment, I definitely would go down and knit the first size, especially because this has a lot more elasticity to it, so I think it is kind of hugging in a little bit more than a summer fibre would. I think a summer fibre would probably stay a lot more stretched out than this one is. But yeah, I'm quite happy with the ease on the body. For the sleeves, I did want a slightly tapered sleeve, and I kind of achieved that. It was a little bit of a challenge to work the decreases for the sleeves in this ribbed pattern, and that also took me quite a while to do, because I basically knit half a sleeve and then had to rip it out. So I've knit like 2.5 sleeves technically. So here is how the sleeve decreases have turned out. They're not my favorite. They don't look the best, especially when there's like lots of purl stitches next to each other. You can really see the gap, and then it also happens up here, and I don't love how that looks, but I also wasn't really sure how else to do it, because basically in the middle of the underarm there's 2 of these knit columns next to each other. So I was thinking originally that I would do the decreases either side of one of the knit columns and have them coming in like this. But because there was 2, that means that I would have had 2 knit columns and then the decreases going in. And I wasn't sure if that was going to be too much fabric, and then you would be able to see the decreases a lot more obviously. To be honest, because I knit half the sleeve and ripped it out, I kind of just wanted to power through and get this done. And they don't look terrible. It's definitely not the best way of doing it, and I think if the pattern was designed to have long sleeves, like if that was written into the pattern, there would definitely be a better way of doing it. But I'm not a designer, so I just went with whatever was working for me. And yeah, I think they look okay in the end. There is a slight taper, and I think that is also helped by the ribbed pattern as well. So it does just kind of like suction in a little bit more onto my arm naturally anyway. I was quite surprised, especially at the underarm, by how much this armhole is coming in just from the ribbing. So that is also why it took me a few attempts to get the decrease rate even enough that it wasn't coming super tight onto my upper arm. Because I also wanted to do the folded over edge at the cuff of the sleeve, I had to be a little bit careful on making sure that it didn't flare out too much. For the body, I went down to a 2.5 from a 2.75 for the hem, and it flares out ever so slightly, but it's really not that noticeable on the body. I did the same thing for the sleeve and just went down to a 2.5, and it flared out so much. I have a photo of how it looked, and I really didn't like the look of it at all. I think flared sleeves can look really good, but with the ripped pattern and how kind of tight the sleeve was, a flared sleeve looks better, I think, if you have more of a gradual flare, but this was kind of like a straight and then flared out right at the cuff. So it just kind of looked like it wasn't supposed to be like that, which it wasn't. So I did go down to a 2.25 for the cuffs on the sleeve, and you can see they do flare out ever so slightly. If I stand up and just hold my arm, you can see there is a tiny bit of a flare, but it's definitely not as bad as it was. And I think this just looks a little bit more intentional, and to be honest, I'm just going to leave it as it is now. I think with a little bit more wear and maybe with blocking, this can even out a little bit more. I haven't blocked the cuffs on either of the sleeves yet, so I might try and ease the whole width of the sleeve a little bit just to try and make it a tiny bit more even. Also, on the second cuff that I did it the exact same way on the same needle size and the same number of rounds, and somehow it's ended up longer. I don't really know how that happened. I have a feeling it's because this uses frogged yarn, so maybe that's why I was just knitting at a tighter gauge without realizing. But you can even see that the gauge looks way tighter on this sleeve than this one, so that's kind of annoying. I'm not going to change it just yet. I'll block it and just see how the yarn blooms on both of them. And then if I need to, I'll go back and take out a few rounds on the slightly longer cuff, because I do like the length of the cuff on this sleeve. To be honest, I did just really want to get this done. My goal for this weekend was to finish all the knitting on my polo, and last night I had the house for myself, so I just had on my favorite podcast, my favorite shows, and I just powered through the rest of the sleeve. So at the end of the evening, I just kind of wanted to get it done and off the needles, and by then I only realized once I've bound this off that it was longer than this one, and I was like, well, it's done now. I'll just block it and see what happens, make a decision from there. So I am pretty happy with the overall fit of this, but I do have a slight issue with the neckline on this, and I don't know if it's an issue that other testers are experiencing or if it's just me and my body. Basically, I just find that the back neck falls down quite far. So as you can see, the polo just sits quite low and there's a lot of the back of my neck exposed, and I feel like if I lift it up so it's kind of where I want it to sit, there's just so much extra fabric here in the front panels, and then I just feel like it doesn't sit how it should. It just feels like it's up a little bit too high, but then it just naturally wants to fall down a little bit lower. There is shaping in the back to raise the neckline a little bit, and I thought maybe it's because I've knit it in a superwash merino that is quite soft and drapey, but then thinking about the samples and what the other testers are using, a lot of them are using drapey summer fibers as well, so I don't think that is 100% what the issue is. Thinking about the other patterns that I've made from this designer, the two Tulsities I've made also have a similar issue in that the back neck just drops off way past where I want it to sit, and I just thought that there wasn't enough short rows in there, but I think it's honestly just the way that Rebecca designs versus my body and my anatomy, so I think that that's just something I'll have to bear in mind when I make more of her patterns in the future, because I do love her designs. She's a really good designer and comes up with very original ideas that are size inclusive, and they're very well constructed and written, but I just think I need to bear in mind that for my body I probably need to add more short rows and more shaping just to raise the back neck a little bit higher. I haven't actually worn this for a full day yet, so I'll have to see if that is actually an issue, or maybe I can fix it with the way that I'm blocking. It is quite tricky to block this to make the collar sit nicely. I also think I might next time add a little bit more length into the collar at the back. I just think that the way it folds is maybe slightly too short, and that might also contribute to having it fall back a little bit because it just doesn't fold where I want it to. I don't know, I need to play around with the blocking and actually wear it for a full day to see what kind of adjustments I would make for my next version. I also love this shoulder detail in this design. It features quite a lot in Rebecca's designs, and I just think it's such a simple way to add a bit of interest into the back of the design. Like I just said, I'll probably make another one of these. I think it would look really good in a summer fibre, and I was in my local yarn store recently and saw they have the Sadness Garn Lena and the Tin Lena yarn, so it was really good to feel them in person and see the colours. I didn't get any at the time because they weren't any colours that I absolutely loved, but I think it's a good option and it's a yarn that I've been really wanting to try. I'm not really thinking about doing summer knits at the moment, but this will be a good contender for when the warmer weather does come around again. I really like how this looks, so I'm just going to leave it on for the rest of the episode. So my next work in progress is one that I have been working on when my Lunen hasn't taken up all my knitting time. So if I needed to block this, or I had an issue and it was on hold and I just needed to wait until it was sorted out, I have been picking up my All My Figures sweater. This is originally designed as a dress, but the pattern also comes with like a sweater slash t-shirt if you want short sleeves, and also a skirt pattern, so it's very versatile. I have knit the dress pattern already, and for a while I've been wanting to make the sweater, so I'm glad that this is finally on my needles. This is a pattern by Stine Jørgensen, also known as All My Knits on Instagram, and I am knitting this in Drops Baby Merino, and I'm also using 3mm needles. I think the recommended needle size is 3.5, but it's also knit with 2 strands held together, whereas I'm just using a single strand of this sport weight merino and had to go down a needle size to get gauge. So I'm knitting the size B for this one, and also making modifications to alter the waist and the hips, and also for height modifications. So that's really handy that you can make sure that it will fit you exactly how you want it to depending on your measurements. It does look quite ridiculous, and I know that it looks really small and long, but because it's knit in this 2x2 ribbed pattern, there is so much stretch built into the fabric of the design. I'll try it on and then I can show off what I've done so far. So as you can see, it is a very tight fitting garment. There's a lot of negative ease built into this, and I have to say it is quite a snug fit at the moment. Most of this hasn't been blocked, which is why the stitches look very uneven and wonky. I'm knitting it out of frogged yarn, so I have faith that blocking will even it out. I have blocked this part of the yoke, so you can definitely see a line where it's been blocked versus unblocked, so all of this will definitely even out and also grow a little bit with blocking. Definitely the yoke has opened up once I blocked it. I just wanted to do a block before I split for sleeves, and I'm glad I did because I did have to add a little bit of extra length just on the top of the yoke. So I managed to knit through the whole body, just on and off in between working on my Lunen, and I did a pretty good Italian bind off on the hem. I am not the best at doing the 2x2 ribbing tubular bind off or Italian bind off, but I have been practicing and I think it doesn't look too bad. Let's see if I can show it. I mean, it's not the neatest, but definitely blocking will probably help even it out a little bit as well. I really love the shaping that happens in the body of this, and it's also mimicked in the sleeves. There is like symmetrical shaping that goes on in the sleeves with how the stitches move around, and I think it looks really beautiful, so I'm excited to keep knitting that and see how the pattern grows. That is the thing with this pattern, is that you do want to just keep knitting and seeing how the fabric comes out and how the stitches move around, and it looks really beautiful. It's very cleverly done. So as you can see, these stitches come all the way down and around the front. It's also the same in the back. So there is a slight difference between the front and the back. There are technically no short rows, and I can definitely feel it. I think the front neck is pulling up a little bit. It is a slight like mock neck length, so I don't think it will be a huge deal. In the dress that I have, I don't find that the lack of short rows is an issue, so hopefully with the sweater it will be the same. I think because it is so fitted, there's not a lot of room for the sweater to be moving up and down the body. I think as I wear this a lot more and keep washing it as well, the fabric will loosen up a little bit and it will be a tiny bit more comfortable because it is quite snug at the moment. I'm kind of thinking maybe I should have done this on 3.25 or 3.5mm needles, but I also quite like how dense the fabric is. I think if it was too sheer, I might not wear it as much because it would be see-through, and it's not the kind of thing that I can really wear anything under. Like I can't really wear a singlet underneath this. You'll definitely see all of the extra fabric bunching up at the bottom. So I think I probably made the right decision, but yeah, it is feeling a little bit snug, and I'm hoping that blocking and wearing will slowly ease that out a little bit. So yeah, with all of the shaping that's going on, it's really engaging knit, and you do want to just keep going and seeing how the pattern comes out and then get to the next section of shaping as well. Because there is so much going on, it is quite a big pattern. I think it is very well explained and written out, but you do have to be quite careful on reading it very closely and making sure that you're following and understanding each section properly. It is broken down into each part of knitting the garment, and I think it's very clear, but I've also knit this before, and I did find the first time took me a lot longer to understand and kind of memorize each part of the pattern. It makes more sense when you're reading it and when you're knitting it, but I do have to say, be aware that there is a lot to invest into knitting one of these, and yeah, you do have to use quite a lot of brain power to keep knitting it. In my opinion, it is 100% worth it though. The thing that I found the most challenging though was probably swapping from a 3x1 rib into a 2x2 rib when I was going from my Lunen to knitting on this. I did find that sometimes I would be counting 3 and 1 on this one or 2 and 2 on my Lunen. It's not that big of a deal. It's kind of obvious when you've knit instead of purled or vice versa, so it's not that hard to undo. But I did find that that was quite an interesting challenge, swapping from 2 different rib patterns. I'll probably keep that in mind next time I'm doing ribbed construction garments, so I might only have one of those going at a time. I think this will be the next thing that I aim to finish. I don't think the sleeves should take me too long. Like I said, they're super fitted, so there's not a huge amount of knitting in them. So hopefully by the next episode, this will be a finished object. I'm also not sure how much longer I'll be able to wear something like this, so I am eager to get it off the needle so I can get a little bit of wear out of it this year before the weather gets too warm to basically be wearing like a long-sleeved wool t-shirt, especially because the Lunen will have a similar function in my wardrobe. Like, they're both kind of fingering weight-ish long-sleeve t-shirts, so I do want to get this one off the needle so I can start wearing them a little bit. My Lanark sweater, the other whip that I have on the needles, hasn't really gotten any love. Here is a quick check-in. It pretty much looks exactly the same as the last time I showed it. This is another of Rebecca Clow's designs that is already released. It's one that I've knit before, and I'm just knitting a second version in the same yarn for myself, just in this really beautiful brown colour. It's also knit in an all-over texture. This one is half fisherman's rib, which is really nice, but it is quite slow going, so I just don't find that I'm wanting to reach for this one as much. But yeah, I think once I'm through with the body, the sleeves should be pretty easy to do, and maybe if I'm sick of knitting a sleeve on my figure sweater, I have this one to go back to instead. So that brings us to the end of the works in progress that I have on the needles, but I do have a very exciting acquisition that I might need some opinions on as well. I do want to knit myself a cardigan and a matching clutch bag for my wedding, which is happening in March next year. And I have had to think about the yarn that I wanted to use, and I ended up getting 3 skeins of this John Arbon Devonia 4-ply yarn in the colour Devonia Cream. This is a fingering weight yarn, and it is definitely not exactly the colour I thought it was going to be. I think on camera it looks a little bit more white, but in person it is quite a creamy yellowy undertone. I don't love the colour, and it's not exactly a colour I would usually go for, but I was planning on holding this with a second strand of fluff anyway, so I also picked up 1 skein of the Fyberspates Cumulus in the early grey colour. I only got 1 ball of the early grey Fyberspates Cumulus because I did want to try some swatching with the Devonia in lots of different colours of fluff just to see what I would like the best. I already had the same yarn in the natural colour, leftovers from my cognac sweater. I also had a strand of this white Drops Kid Silk, which is definitely the most white out of all of them, and I thought if I didn't like the yellowish tones that were coming out of the natural colour, then I might try it with a white and just see what kind of fabric came out. So here is my swatch. It's not blocked yet, but I mainly just wanted to do this as a colour test. So at the bottom is the natural Cumulus, this is the early grey, and this is the white Kid Silk. This is all done on 3.5mm needles, and probably the first thing you can tell is how different the gauge is for the Cumulus versus the Kid Silk. The Cumulus yarn is definitely a thicker fibre. It's not really a true lace weight compared to the Kid Silk, so I think that's something I'll have to keep in mind when I'm selecting a pattern. I quite like the natural colour. It's definitely a lot more warm toned and peachy than it is white. I'm just not sure how well this will go with my dress. I actually haven't got my dress yet because I'm making that. I don't have the final fabrics yet, so I'm not sure if I will like this against what I'm having in mind for the dress fabric. The natural Cumulus, I do like this colour, but I'm just not sure how well it will go with a white dress. The early grey, I love how this has turned out, but it is definitely way too grey versus being a white. I think this is something that I can see myself making a sweater out of in the future though. And then at last I did try the white Kid Silk, and I think this is my favourite colour out of the three and what I had most in mind. I think the white definitely just makes the yellowish a little bit cooler, but it's definitely not like a white because I don't think I want like a bright white cardigan either. I just don't think that would suit me either. So I think this is a good in-between of being a warmer white, but definitely not like a bright in-your-face shiny white. So my original plan of holding the Devonia with a Fyberspates Cumulus is probably ruled out because they don't have a white colour. Mohair is also ruled out because I just don't like the feeling of mohair. So I was having a look online and I think there's a Chaska Aqua yarn. It's AQU. I haven't used it before, but it is a similar composition to the Cumulus, but I think it is more of a true lace weight. So I'm leaning towards going to a yarn store and trying to find that. I think one of the ones around me does stock it and they do have a white colour. At least it looks very white online. So I might go and pick up a skein or two of that and then do another swatch. So in terms of patterns, I mentioned that I probably want to do a matching clutch, and I'm thinking I would do the Winter Clutch by Petite Knit or one of her clutch patterns. I think I am leaning more towards the Winter Clutch. I really like the texture of that and I think it will look good with the strand of fluff held with the strand of wool. I also forgot to mention why I chose the Devonia yarn in the first place. So the John Arbon Textiles is based, I think, in North Devon, and it is all designed, blended and spun at the mill in Devon, and they only use British wool breed. So this one is 50% Exmoor Blueface, 30% Blueface Leicester and 20% Bluster breeds. So I grew up and spent a little bit of my childhood in Devon, not in North Devon, but in the same county, and I thought that would be a really nice nod to where I partly grew up, and I have a lot of really happy memories of being there. So that is the main reason why I bought this. It's a yarn that I've been wanting to try for a while, and it's definitely not an expensive, pricey yarn. I think considering how high quality it is, it does feel really nice, and I really like the ethos behind the brand. So it's definitely not a luxury purchase, but it is more of a sentimental one. In terms of the cardigan that I want to make, I haven't finalized a pattern yet. My prerequisites are that it has to be a wrap cardigan, quite fitted, and like around a DK-ish weight gauge as well. I've been having a look at Ravelry and Instagram, and I've narrowed it down to a few options, and I think I know which one I'm leaning towards the most, but I'd also be interested to hear your opinions. I honestly don't think I'll actually need to wear the cardigan. It doesn't really get that cold in March. Sometimes down in Margaret River it will get a little bit chilly in the evenings, but I'll probably be dancing and having a few glasses of wine, so I don't think I'll actually feel the cold enough to need it. But it's more just the idea that I'll have something that I knit for my wedding and something that I can wear afterwards as well. So that's the other thing, is that it has to be something that I'll reach for in my day-to-day wardrobe. So the first ones that I was thinking of are both by Florence Miller, or Handmade by Florence. She has released 2 wrap cardigan designs. One of them is the Robinson wrap cardigan and the other one is a Mabel wrap. I was leaning towards a Robinson wrap cardigan at first. It is quite fitted, it has a little bit of negative ease built into it, and it is a raglan construction, and I thought for a while that that would be the one that I would make. There's also the Mabel wrap, which is a drop shoulder and it has a bit of positive ease built into it, but I think the positive ease and the drop shoulder is just not exactly the look that I want, so I'm pretty sure I'm not going to make that one. When I was looking through the Ravelry projects for the Robinson wrap cardigan, I did find a few that I really liked, and I thought that fit is exactly the fit that I want to go for. But then I also saw quite a lot that just looked too loose, and the cross of the V didn't sit properly, and I was a little bit hesitant to go for that, just in case mine didn't come out exactly like I had in mind. So I'm not sure that that one will be the best option, but it is definitely a strong contender. The other one that I found on Ravelry is from a designer I hadn't heard of before. It is the Grace wrap by Kate Oates, and it is very similar to the Robinson wrap cardigan in that it's very fitted, it's a raglan construction, but it has a shorter ribbing and shorter sleeves. I actually think there's no ribbing on the bottom. There's definitely a little bit of ribbing on the sleeves, and the sleeves end like quite high up the arms. So I could probably add a little bit of length, but they were also very fitted. So I think that's a strong contender. And there's also a lot of sizes, like size options in that pattern. And my final two options were by Pernille Larsen, and that is the Late Summer Wrap and the Darling Wrap Cardigan. The Darling Wrap Cardigan is 2x2 rib, which I really like the look of, but I'm just not sure how it will go with the strand of fluff, because the Suri alpaca can be quite fluffy, and it does have quite a big halo. I'm not sure how that would look in the ribbed pattern, and I also think that might make it a bit harder to style, especially with the pattern fabric. So that leaves us with the Late Summer Wrap, and I think this one and the Robinson Wrap Cardigan are two of my favourites. I'm leaning slightly more towards the Darling Wrap Cardigan because it is a saddle shoulder construction, which I really like, and I think the fit looks a lot more classic. I also really like the double knitting finishes on the Late Summer Wrap. I think it's also designed to be worn with a little bit of negative ease. On the Ravelry project page for the Late Summer Wrap, most of the projects I was looking at looked very similar to the sample cardigan, in that they had a good amount of ease, and the cross of the wrap looked really good as well. So I am thinking that that might be a better option, but there were also a lot of comments saying that it was a really confusing pattern, and there are a few anomalies in there that people had to fix along the way. So it's definitely something that I'll probably have to start sooner rather than later to make sure I'm happy with how it looks in the end, and maybe overcome a few challenges that are in the pattern. But I think if I go into it expecting there to be issues, it shouldn't be too much of a disappointment. I'd love to hear your opinions on which wrap cardigan was your favourite and which one you think that I should go for. My dress will be quite fitted at the bodice, so I can definitely get away with quite a fitted wrap cardigan. So that's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you very much for watching until the end, and I hope you enjoyed, and yeah, let me know your thoughts on the cardigan as well. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!